Hello coin lovers, welcome to the Coin Riches channel. Listen closely, because the coin we're talking about today is not just another quarter lost in your pocket or sitting quietly in a jar somewhere in your home. This is the kind of story that makes people stop mid-step, the kind that makes collectors lean forward, and the kind that makes ordinary people suddenly realize that something small, something ordinary, can carry extraordinary value. If you are someone who grew up in the 70s, 80s, or even earlier, then you know exactly what I mean. You remember a time when coins actually meant something. When change wasn't just ignored or tossed aside. When every coin had weight, personality, and sometimes, a story waiting to be discovered. And today, we're stepping back into that feeling, because the 1982 Washington quarter is not famous for being flashy. It's not made of gold. It doesn't scream importance at first glance. In fact, most people who see it would never look twice. And that is exactly what makes this story so powerful. You see, in 1982, America was going through a quiet transition. Inflation had reshaped everyday life. Manufacturing was changing. And even the way coins were produced began to shift in subtle ways that very few people noticed at the time. But collectors, real collectors, they understand something most people don't. The biggest treasures are often born during moments of change. The Washington quarter itself had already been part of American life for decades. Introduced back in 1932 to honor George Washington, it became one of the most familiar coins in circulation. It passed through millions of hands. Grocery stores, gas stations, laundromats, parking meters. It was never meant to be rare. It was never meant to be special. It was designed to be used, and used heavily, and that's where the story begins to take a turn. By the early 1980s, the US Mint was under pressure. Budget constraints, production challenges, and evolving minting standards created a perfect storm of subtle irregularities. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that made headlines. But beneath the surface, tiny variations began slipping into circulation. Small details that most people ignored, but details that would later become incredibly important. Now think about this for a moment. Back then, nobody was saving quarters from everyday change thinking they would become valuable. People spent them. Dropped them into vending machines. Tossed them into drawers. Children spent them on candy. Adults used them without a second thought. And because of that, very few pristine examples survived. That alone makes coins from this era fascinating. But the 1982 quarter carries an even deeper layer of intrigue. Coins from the Denver Mint that year quietly developed a reputation among serious collectors. Not because of hype. Not because of marketing. But because of what they represented, a moment when quality control wasn't as consistent as people assumed. For many years, this coin sat in the shadows. It wasn't talked about in everyday conversations. It wasn't highlighted in mainstream collecting guides. It was one of those pieces that only experienced collectors whispered about. The kind of coin that shows up unexpectedly, and makes people pause. Imagine someone sorting through an old coin jar inherited from a parent or grandparent. Dust floating in the sunlight. The faint metallic clink of coins touching each other. Nothing seems special at first. Just memories in metal form. But then, tucked among the ordinary, something different appears. A coin that looks familiar, yet carries an energy that's hard to explain. This is the emotional side of coin collecting that many people overlook. It's not always about metal. It's about time. It's about history sitting quietly in your hands. And for people over 35, over 45, over 60, that connection hits deeper. Because you've lived enough life to understand that value isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, and that whisper is exactly what makes the 1982 Washington quarter so compelling. Collectors who have spent decades studying coins often talk about a certain feeling, the moment when an ordinary object suddenly reveals hidden importance. It's not dramatic. It's subtle. But once you feel it, you never forget it. And coins like this are responsible for countless moments like that. There's also something deeply nostalgic about coins from this period. They come from a time before digital payments, before contactless transactions, before money became invisible. Back then, currency had texture. You could hear it, feel it, recognize it without looking. And that physical connection created memories that stay with people for a lifetime. That's why stories like this resonate so strongly with mature audiences. Because they're not just about wealth. They're about rediscovery. About realizing that something from the past, something you may have held dozens of times, could carry meaning far beyond what anyone imagined. And here's where things become even more fascinating. As the years passed, collectors began re-examining coins from the early 80s with fresh eyes. Auction houses started noticing patterns. Grading experts began paying closer attention. And slowly, quietly, certain coins that had once been overlooked started stepping into the spotlight, not because they changed, but because our understanding changed. That shift is one of the most powerful forces in the world of rare coins. Value doesn't always come from rarity alone. Sometimes it comes from awareness. From the moment people finally recognize what has been hiding in plain sight all along, and when that realization spreads, everything changes. The 1982 D Washington quarter is one of those coins that lives right on that edge, between ordinary and extraordinary. Between forgotten and unforgettable. It represents the kind of discovery that makes people rethink what they thought they knew about money, and maybe, just maybe, it makes you wonder about the coin sitting quietly in your own home right now, because history has a strange way of repeating itself. The coins people ignore today often become the treasures people chase tomorrow, and the deeper you go into this story, the more you begin to realize that this isn't just about a quarter. It's about perspective. It's about patience. And it's about the quiet possibility that something small, something easily overlooked, might carry a story far bigger than anyone expected. Now imagine the moment when curiosity turns into realization. A collector sits at a table late at night. A soft lamp glowing overhead. A magnifying glass resting beside a stack of coins gathered over decades. The world outside is quiet, but in that small space, history feels alive. This is where discoveries are made, not in loud rooms or crowded auctions, but in silence, patience, and attention. That's how coins like the 1982 D Washington quarter begin to reveal themselves. At first glance, it behaves like any other quarter. The familiar portrait. The weight you felt 1,000 times before. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screams importance. But experienced collectors don't rush. They slow down. They observe details most people never notice. They look at strike quality. Surface texture. Luster that hasn't been dulled by years of circulation. They study edges, fields, and subtle characteristics that tell a deeper story. And sometimes, in rare cases, they find something extraordinary hiding behind a completely ordinary appearance. This is where the emotional pull begins, because discovery in the coin world is not about luck alone. It's about awareness. It's about the willingness to pause and truly see what's in front of you. And for viewers who have lived through decades of change, that message carries weight. You understand that the most meaningful discoveries in life often happen when you slow down. The 1982 D quarter represents that philosophy perfectly. By the time collectors began seriously re-evaluating coins from this era, something surprising started happening. Specimens that had survived in exceptional condition began standing out. Coins that had somehow escaped heavy wear, coins that were preserved by accident, coins that had quietly waited decades to be noticed, and those coins started telling a new story, not a story about metal or minting alone, but a story about survival. Think about everything a coin goes through. It travels through hands, machines, pockets, and time itself. It gets dropped, scratched, exposed to heat, cold, and neglect. Most coins lose their original brilliance within months. But a tiny fraction, a very tiny fraction, somehow endure, and when they do, they become something else entirely. This is why collectors talk about condition with almost reverence. Because in the world of coins, condition is time frozen. A perfectly preserved coin is like a window into the past, untouched and unchanged while everything else moved forward, and when that level of preservation meets a coin from a transitional era, the result can be remarkable. People often assume rarity means low mintage. But seasoned collectors know a deeper truth. True rarity often comes from survival, not production. Millions of coins may have been made, but only a handful remain in extraordinary condition decades later. That's where the real scarcity lives, and scarcity, when finally recognized, has a powerful effect that it transforms perception. Suddenly, something that was once overlooked becomes desirable. Something ignored becomes studied. Something ordinary becomes extraordinary. And that transformation is one of the most fascinating forces in collecting. The 1982 D Washington quarter sits right at the heart of that transformation. For years, it moved quietly through circulation. No spotlight. No hype. No viral attention. Just another coin living an ordinary life. But as time moved forward and pristine examples became harder to find, collectors began realizing that certain survivors from this year were far more special than anyone expected. And here's where the emotional connection deepens even further, because coins like this don't just represent value. They represent time capsules. They carry the energy of a different era, an era many viewers still remember clearly. A time when life felt slower. When money felt tangible. When the future still felt wide open. Holding a coin from that period can feel like holding a memory. Not your memory exactly, but something close enough to stir emotion. A reminder of grocery stores with real cash registers. Gas stations where you paid with coins and bills. Afternoons where a handful of change could actually buy something meaningful. That's why mature audiences connect so deeply with stories like this. Because it's not just about discovering a valuable coin. It's about rediscovering a feeling that modern life rarely gives us anymore. And then comes the turning point in every great coin story, the moment when curiosity becomes urgency. Because once people realize that certain coins from their past might carry unexpected importance, they start looking differently at everything around them. Old drawers suddenly feel mysterious. Coin jars feel heavier. Inherited collections become more than sentimental, they become possibilities. This shift in perspective is powerful. It awakens something people didn't know was sleeping. A sense of wonder. A sense that maybe, just maybe, life still has a few surprises left. And that idea resonates deeply with anyone who has lived long enough to understand how rare genuine surprises really are. The 1982 D Washington quarter has sparked moments like that for countless people, not because it's common knowledge. Not because it's widely advertised. But because its story spreads quietly, through collectors, conversations, and unexpected discoveries. The kind of story that travels slowly but sticks permanently, and when stories stick, they create movements. People begin checking their change again. They begin asking questions. They begin paying attention in a way they haven't in years. And that renewed attention brings something priceless back into their lives. Curiosity. Curiosity is powerful at any age. But after 40, after 50, after 60, curiosity becomes something even more meaningful. It becomes a reminder that discovery doesn't belong only to the young. That new excitement can still arrive in the most unexpected ways. That's the hidden gift behind coins like this. They don't just offer financial intrigue. They offer emotional renewal, and as this story continues to unfold, one realization starts becoming impossible to ignore. The value of a coin is never just about what it's made of. It's about timing, awareness, preservation, and sometimes, destiny, because every once in a while, a coin survives decades quietly, waiting for the exact moment when the world is finally ready to see it differently, and when that moment arrives, everything changes. And this is where the story reaches its most powerful moment, because every great coin story has a turning point, a moment when quiet curiosity suddenly collides with undeniable reality. A moment when something that felt like a possibility becomes a fact. And for the 1982 D Washington quarter, that moment didn't happen overnight. It built slowly, almost silently, over years of rediscovery. Auction rooms began to notice, not the loud, mainstream moments that make headlines, but the quieter ones that serious collectors pay attention to. The kind of moments where seasoned bidders lean forward in their chairs. Where the atmosphere becomes tense, not because of noise, but because of understanding. When people in the room know they are witnessing something rare, not just in metal, but in meaning, because by this stage, the truth had started to settle in. exceptional examples of the 1982 Washington quarter were no longer just coins. They had crossed an invisible line. They had entered the realm where condition, timing, and survival merge into something almost legendary. The kind of space where collectors stop thinking in terms of sense and start thinking in terms of legacy, and legacy is a powerful word. It's not about quick profit. It's not about trends. Legacy is about permanence. About the idea that something small can outlive generations and still carry significance. And that idea resonates deeply with people who have lived long enough to understand the true value of time, because by 40, by 50, by 60, you start to see things differently. You realize that the objects that survive are the ones that matter. The photographs that never faded. The letters that were never thrown away. The heirlooms that quietly waited in drawers while life kept moving. And sometimes, the coins that stayed unnoticed while decades passed by. That emotional weight is what transforms a coin from metal into memory, and when collectors began placing pristine 1982 quarters under professional grading, something remarkable started happening. Coins that had been sleeping in obscurity were suddenly being recognized for what they truly were: survivors. Time capsules. Silent witnesses to an era that could never be repeated, and recognition changes everything, because once the world recognizes something as rare, perception shifts instantly. Demand awakens. Attention grows. And the quiet becomes loud. Not in noise, but in significance. Suddenly, the same coin that once bought a cup of coffee decades ago is now being examined under precision lighting. Documented. Catalogued. Protected. Not because it changed, but because understanding finally caught up with it, and that realization carries a powerful emotional punch. Think about it. How many things in life have passed through your hands without you knowing their future importance? How many ordinary moments later revealed extraordinary meaning? That feeling, the mix of nostalgia and awe, is exactly what makes stories like this unforgettable, because the 1982 Washington quarter isn't just about discovery. It's about perspective. It's about realizing that value doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly in the background while life moves forward. And then comes the moment every collector remembers, the moment when a coin crosses the auction block and the room holds its breath. No drama. No theatrics. Just numbers rising steadily, almost respectfully. Each bid carrying decades of history behind it. Each increase representing not just money, but belief. Belief in rarity. Belief in preservation. Belief in the idea that something small can carry enormous significance. And in that moment, the past and present collide. The coin that once traveled through everyday pockets, that once clinked against keys and counters, now sits under bright lights as collectors recognize what it has become. Not just currency. Not just history. But proof that time has a way of rewarding patience, proof that survival has value, proof that the ordinary can become extraordinary, and when the final number lands, it doesn't just surprise people, it stays with them. Because that number forces a shift in how we see the world around us. It makes people go home and open old drawers. It makes them pick up coin jars they haven't touched in years. It makes them pause, reflect, and wonder what else they may have overlooked along the way. That's the real power of stories like this. They don't just inform. They awaken, they remind us that life still holds hidden layers. That discovery isn't reserved for museums or experts. That sometimes, the most incredible surprises are sitting quietly within arm's reach, waiting for someone curious enough to notice, and maybe that's the most meaningful part of this entire journey, because whether you're 35 or 65 or beyond, stories like this carry a message that goes far beyond coins. They remind us that value evolves. That time reshapes everything. And that patience, quiet, steady patience, often holds rewards we never see coming. The 1982 Washington quarter teaches that lesson in the most unexpected way possible. It began as something ordinary. Something millions of people handled without a second thought. It lived an unnoticed life, blending into the rhythm of everyday transactions. But time had other plans. Preservation had other plans. And eventually, awareness caught up, and when it did, the world saw it differently, not as spare change, not as a forgotten relic, but as a symbol of hidden potential, because in the right condition, in the right moment, with the right story behind it. This unassuming quarter reached a value that feels almost impossible to imagine for something so small. A value that transforms curiosity into disbelief. A value that turns nostalgia into shock. A value that proves, beyond any doubt, that even the smallest pieces of history can carry extraordinary weight, and that is why today, one remarkable example of the 1982 D Washington quarter has stunned collectors with a value reaching an astonishing $196,000. And once you hear that number, you never look at your change the same way again.